me open the second part of the first session, and our first speaker will be Raffaella Neri. The title of the presentation is The City, the Beginning and the End of Architecture.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank you for your kind invitation. It's always a pleasure to come in Krakow at the Politechniki. So, personally, I remain convinced that the majority of the reasons for the forms of architecture must be sought in the morphology, geography, and character of the sites, so that the new works can in turn bring a new form to these places, with the aim of these new places belonging to the city, identifying it, continuing its history, and at the same time renewing it through a new interpretation. It is true that architecture today seems to be moving in quite another direction, considering each building as an object, independent of its surrounding, overbearing or indifferent, sometimes, in the best cases, a test of virtuosity or a technical or technological challenge. However, this is the substantial difference between a work of architecture and a design object. An object, precisely, in the sense that it has no fixed position, is self-sufficient and finds its raison d'être only in itself and in its functioning. I believe the contrary to be true, that the fundamental task of architecture is to build places, to give a space a recognizable form. This goal comes sooner than the design of the building itself. It is the main purpose of an architect's work, and in this sense, the composition of buildings is its tool. The architectural project is therefore not limited to the single artifact, but to its sphere of influence, which will differ each place. I always give the example of a castle atop a hill. Its construction not only defines its interior spaces and the places directly connected with it. Its very presence marks a landscape as far as the eye can see, and this in general was precisely why the castle was built. The term composition is applied to an architectural project and to the act of establishing relationships between volumes in order to create spaces endowed with value and form. Architecture composes in order to define places, spaces, and voids. The spaces of a city are defined through its architecture, and architectural composition means also urban composition. If composing architecture means giving urban space a form, measuring it and identifying it, then the central problem becomes the decision on the principle of order to be adopted for the construction of new buildings and new places in a city. Because composition, which is the tool to achieve an end, must contain a meaningful objective, composing in relation to an idea of order to be imposed on places, an order which, of course, has nothing to do with geometry, but with a meaning, which is then translated into a form. This may be an existing principle suggested by or found in places and in their history, which is recognized, reproduced, and transfigured, or a brand new, different, and alternative principle. But in every case, a general principle of order must be present and recognizable to guide the act of composing and defining architectures. If on the one hand we cannot stop proposing new settlement principles coming from our culture and knowledge, on the other hand it is necessary to guarantee continuity. This is the difficulty which any urban composition project must face, to establish the balance between the extant and a transformation, aware of the fact that any intervention, however minimal and minute, will nonetheless modify the original spatial structure. In relation to the search for a balance between the principle of order and respect for the pre-existing character of places, I would like to show two projects developed at the Politecnico of Milan. These projects are two university sites positioned in two opposite parts of the city in context with a different character and history, an issue that the city of Milan has been debating for some time. The first project is located in an area of the historical suburbs northwest of Milan, known as Bovisa, and made famous by the paintings of Mario Sironi, an important industrial site of a former gas supply company, but abandoned for decades. The project concerned the new settlement of the Politecnico, which wishes to establish its second city seat here, and in part has already done so. The second one would involve the transformation of areas in the replacement of buildings belonging to the State University and to two hospitals, the National Cancer Institute and the Neurological Institute, in the process of being transferred. These sites are close to the original seat of Polytechnic, located within a firmly established area in the Città Studi districts, laid out by plans of the early 19th. The two projects propose similar themes and suggest similar aims in very different urban conditions within the city of Milan. In both cases, the fundamental undertaking of the project is to define the compositional principle for the sites, or the principle of order, to be implemented through the composition of buildings and services for the universities and the city, considering the relationship with the context, the differences in character and history of the areas, and the intended destinations. We developed the master plans for the sites, and only then the design of the individual buildings following the indications of the master plan. The groups of students tried out different alternatives for the individual work of architecture to verify their suitability in their master thesis. The area in Bovisa district is an industrial site known as the Drop, because, I don't know why, because of the shape of the tracks that fence it in. This area has already been identified more than 30 years ago as the site for a possible expansion of the Politecnico by a group of its professors. The choice was based on an idea of the city that considered the establishment of public institutions on a territorial scale a necessary condition to bring an urban quality and new identity to these suburban areas cut off from the life of the city, as Bovisa then was. The proposal was reinforced by a decisive condition for a university. This area was served by two railway lines with two distinct stations, in turn well connected to the metropolitan transport system, which would be further expanded. The Polytechnic site would therefore constitute the new urban pole of a polycentric city, a city no more based on a dominant center where institutions and places of value were concentrated, with an extensive surrounding, substantially residential suburbs. The new settlement represented an opportunity to offer new places and new collective buildings in this part of the city that was historically devoid of them. An initial project for the Polytechnic site, in which I participated as a PhD student at the time, was developed by the Department of Architectural Design and Urban Planning on behalf of the municipality and was coordinated by Antonio Monestiroli. After multiple vagaries, including serious problems of soil contamination, a competition, and unfulfilled assignment, the municipality partially reclaimed the area and reinserted it within the territorial government plans, redefining the site's destination and perimeter. In 2016, the Polytechnic launched an internal call addressed to teachers and researchers to develop a new project for this area. You can see the area in this map where different urban projects are drawn. In this latter hypothesis, we took for granted the general principle that had led to the identification of the site. We took note of the easy railway accessibility, which had increased over time, the persistent inadequate road links, and the installations of classroom and departments in several neighborhood industrial buildings abandoned and repurposed. The principle of order underlying the project did not differ much in its general line, I don't know it, from the original one, albeit in different forms, while taking into account the changed conditions of the site. It hypothesized the presence of a large central collective place, a park, open to the city, overlooked by departments, research laboratories, classrooms, and residences, both for the university and outsiders. On one side, the park is bordered by the surviving gasometers, a memory of the site's industrial past, repurposed as performance venues. On the other side, by the Central Public Library, a remarkable building for this study place. Perpendicular to the park, a second public place will connect the new site with the two railway stations and the districts outside the drop. This is a plaza featuring commercial, cultural, and sports facilities, as well as a multi-hall auditorium and other buildings for research and work. The two railway stations guarantee accessibility and connection with other parts of the city, and with a new mixed residential district, also a subject of this new plan. Car accessibility is guaranteed but will be restricted, excluding the possibility of crossing the new sites. The degree thesis of the students then developed several architectural projects following the indication of a master plan. I'm showing you without any other comment. They are fundamentally a master thesis of the students. In the Città Studi area, the planned transfer of the two hospitals to Sesto San Giovanni and of some department of the State University to the former Expo area makes it possible to rearrange the entire district, which has expanded over time in order to offer new services and to bring a new definition to the collective places of the two institutes living side by side, the Politecnico and the State University, as well as to the city. As the name itself suggests, Città Studi, that means the city of the studies, grew rapidly around the site of the first Polytechnic and the scientific departments of the State University. From the 1920s, in the wake of the 19th century plans that foresaw the city ordered by blocks. Over the years, the built fabric became welded to the ancient village of Lambrate toward the east, and its industrial settlement limited by the railway embankment and the Lambro River. Surrounded by their enclosures, the buildings of the two university poles and the hospitals have grown on themselves, besieged by a city that has expanded around them, occupying all the available land and preventing any further development. Thanks to the transfer, which will free up large areas between the buildings of the university, the theme is now to design a system of open spaces whose task is to establish clearer new relationships between the parts through the arrangement of some urban public places, squares, parks and gardens, along with the construction of some university facilities, a library, an auditorium, an enhancing of the extent sports facilities and provision of residencies and services for students, of which Milan has a great need. A study of the road network has allowed us to hypothesize the pedestrianization of Via Celoria, this is the green axis, an axis striding the two enclosures of the old Polytechnic and the Department of the State University to become a three-lined avenue, a kind of rambla, for meetings and relaxations that would represent a continuation of the park of Piazza Leonardo da Vinci on the west side, which is already a meeting place for the students, extending as far as another open green space defined by the presence of the new library and the piazza of the new auditoriums. The pedestrian street would continue alongside the existing athletics track, recently redeveloped, and on the opposite side, a new sports center linked to the existing south neighborhoods. Continuing toward the city center, this rambla becomes a key urban axis, and in the opposite direction, bordering the street among places for sports, the park and the existing department will be a group of tall buildings, visible from afar, intended to accommodate new homes for students around the square and communal services. In the same way, the master plan was developed with a group of students who, in their master thesis, designed the individual work of the architecture that could give form to this scheme. Thank you very much.